Okay, so looking at succession, so here we have the scale of succession planning, and I'll just wait for a moment. And what we're looking at is the transfer by Akira of assets in Singapore into a Singapore trust. So if we look back, this used to be a investment account that was held by Akira personally. And he was convinced, presumably by a relationship manager or some other financial professional, to create a trust. Now, the questions that are asked here is, what is the Japanese tax consequence and what are the Thai tax consequences of creating a trust of assets held in Singapore whilst Akira is domiciled and citizen of Japan, but tax resident in Thailand? I think I'd invite Tsuchi to deal first with the Japanese tax consequences of creating this trust.
Yes, from a Japanese perspective, the point is if the trust is transparent or not. So if this trust is transparent, this arrangement will be ignored from a Japanese perspective, and there will be no change. And if this trust is treated as a corporation for Japanese tax purposes, the tax treatment will be totally different. But in many cases, this type of family trust should be transparent from a Japanese perspective.
Right, and when you say transparent, can you just expand a little bit on what that principally means within a tax context?
Yeah, so basically almost all the trust is transparent. So, so that should be ignored from a Japanese perspective. But if it's a kind of similar to corporation, it's sometimes treated as a corporation. So we have to look into the trust deed in detail. And for example, if the beneficiary is not identified at the time of the trust, that trust should be treated as a corporation. But on the other hand, if the beneficiary, all the beneficiaries are identified at the time of the trust, basically that trust should be treated as a transparent trust.
Zach?
Of in like, right? Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah, can you repeat, Zach? You broke up.
So I'm just thinking about the concept of the beneficiaries being identified, and whether or not, does this mean that they are a class, like all the children of X, or it means that they're not identified at all? How does that work?
Yes, the name of the beneficiaries must be identified when they create trust. So sometimes under the trust deed, which is established under the common law countries, sometimes beneficiaries are not clearly identified in the trust deed, and the beneficiary will be identified in the future. So that trust may be treated as a corporation for Japanese tax purposes, and so that's why we always look at the trust deed, and each beneficiary is actually identified or not.
Right, right. Okay, thinking about in terms of the tax consequences in Thailand on Akira, who's now a Thai tax resident,
Yep.
creates a trust of assets in Singapore. Are there any applicable Thai tax consequences that we ought to be aware of?
Similar to the first case that we discussed before in terms of Mr. Tanet and Ratna, because in Thailand for personal income tax purpose, we have no rule on the nationality. We have a resident rule, we have a source income rule, and in this case, Akira Sang and Kin are the Thai tax resident. Similar tax consequences when both of them set up the Singapore trust. It depends on the control or not control, or PTC, private trust, company or corporation. Right. If they still control, it means that the ownership or the possession of the asset not transferred to the trust.
Right,
Yes,
right.
the control. Yeah.